Nintendo have always had rather strict censorship policies, and when developers are producing or porting games to their systems, they may find themselves being asked to change, remove and censor certain segments before Nintendo will accept it, especially when it comes to alcohol, smoking, swearing, animal cruelty, blood, gore, excessive violence, nudity and religion. But even with these policies in place, Nintendo have found themselves sometimes having to recall, update and censor various elements in their own games, and maybe sometimes to respect different cultures and opinions around the globe. And joining us today to help guide us through this episode, we have the awesome Nathan Wooten from the YouTube channel of Woots, as this is Bits Nintendo Did Not Want You to See 2. First of all, we're checking out Capcom's arcade game, Captain Commando, a futuristic side-scrolling beat-em-up which made its way onto the Super Nintendo but was heavily censored, particularly when it comes to the finishing moves on enemies and, believe it or not, even the character descriptions. Like here for example was, on the arcade, Jinzu the Ninja was described as a master of ninjutsu. He is very agile and can cut enemies in half with a single stroke of his sword, a description which is very true as shown here in the game. But don't expect this on the Super Nintendo, as enemies just simply drop dead and the bio reads, a master of ninjutsu. He is very agile and attacks enemies with his sword. And the same goes for Mac the Knife's bio, and speaking of Mac, as when he attacks enemies, sometimes their bodies will quickly decompose and melt into a pool of gunk on the floor, while they will simply fall to the ground and vanish on the Super Nintendo port. And if you're after blood effects, enemies being burnt to a crisp by Captain Commando, or smoking animation, well, don't bother, because they have all been removed.
Mega Man Legends is an action-adventure shooter which was first released onto the PlayStation 1 during 1997 and eventually found its way onto the Nintendo 64 under the title of Rockman Dash in Japan in 2000 and Mega Man 64 in North America in 2001. And it was within the North American port that Nintendo decided to censor a few parts, including a spot of animal cruelty. Earlier on in the game, after locating Old Man Barrel, who was found chatting with the mayor inside City Hall, it is at this point when you could wander outside, where you will see Tron Bonne being chased by Paprika the dog. Upon investigating further, you will now discover Tron on the other side of town, clinging to a lamppost, while Paprika constantly barks at her from the pavement below. It's a pretty easy situation to deal with, as all you need to do is simply talk to the dog and it will wander away. Though, if you are playing the Japanese port, then you don't even need to engage in conversation with Paprika if you don't want to. Because if you really want to, you can just stand next to the dog and kick it up into the air. Problem solved.
Lethal Enforcers is a light gun shooter which was created by Konami and released into the arcades in 1992, and yes, is a game that caused quite a bit of a stir at the time, and thanks large in part to the use of digitised photos of real people being used to portray enemies and hostages that we could shoot at on screen. And while that didn't stop the game being ported to the Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis, between the two games there are quite a number of watered down moments, and of course thanks to Nintendo's censorship. The most obvious one is seen when you are hit by an enemy as the screen cracks and it flashes red. Well, at least it did on the Sega Genesis port, as in Nintendo's game, it would flash green.
Put your hands on this thing! Magnum forward.
And while you could accidentally kill hostages during the Sega Genesis version, Nintendo made sure that you could not kill the hostages and you would instead receive a caution and the game would remove a part of your life. And other censored parts include the removal of the homeless guy in the subway of level 2, and instead of the boss falling from moving vehicles like here in the Sega Genesis version, they would instead flash and disappear on the Super Nintendo.
Reload! 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 Situation under control. Unit 5 out.
Next up, we are checking in on that famous Nintendo moment when Wario becomes so intoxicated that he can barely move. Yes, amazingly, during Chapter 2 in Wario Land 2, in a level called Escape from the Woods, Wario will stumble upon enemies simply known as penguins, who in the Japanese version would be holding a mug of beer and would be continuously throwing it forward towards Wario in an effort to smother him, and if he's hit, he will transform into what the Japanese manual describes him as, Drunk Wario. Making him somewhat uncontrollable and yes, inebriated. But it does have its advantages, since Wario gains the ability to be able to burp in enemies' faces and kill them. Of course, Nintendo didn't think the rest of us could handle this, so the mugs of beer were replaced with balls, instead turning Wario into Crazy Wario. But it would still produce exactly the same effect. In The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, there are quite a number of censored moments that many of us would have no idea even existed, unless perhaps you played the German, French, or Japanese copies of the game. These copies have several differences between them that were not included in any of the other versions. The first censored moment arrives when Link discovers Martha's Bay and comes into contact with Martha the Mermaid. Martha will ask Link to find her bikini, which she lost while swimming in the bay. It is at this point that if Link were to dive under the water next to her in search of it, that Martha would call him a pervert in the Japanese version, or say, "Hey, knock it off, you rascal," in the German game. But that's not all. When Link finds the fishhook and gives it to the fisherman hiding under the bridge just to the south, the fisherman will attach it to his line, throw it in, and bring up the mermaid's missing bikini. And in the Japanese version, would say something along the lines of, "The hook became a pink bra, lucky." While in the German port, the fisherman would say, "Your hook is now a sexy bikini top. Wow, drooling." This apparently was deemed a little too racy for the rest of the world, and subsequently, Nintendo removed the bikini and swapped it out for a pearl necklace instead. Then, while taking a trip to Animal Village, located to the southeast of the map, Link can stumble in on an alligator who is painting a portrait of a hippo. In the Japanese and German versions, the hippo is only partially covered in a towel while exposing her chest, but will immediately sit down on the floor in embarrassment and cover her modesty. But in all the other versions, when Link stumbles across the posing hippo, she will not be wearing a towel, nor does she have any defined chest area to cover up. But she will still drop down to the floor in embarrassment after being caught posing in the nude.
So what else is there? Well, one of the mother of all censors came about when Duke Nukem 3D was ported to the Nintendo 64 under the title, of course, Duke Nukem 64. Hell yeah, Duke isn't exactly Nintendo friendly, and as you can imagine, the game would cross quite a number of lines on Nintendo's content guidelines list, particularly when it comes to alcohol, animal cruelty, blood, sex, strip clubs, bars and religion, meaning the developers had to change quite a lot before they could please Nintendo. From steroids becoming vitamins to the famous bar sporting the O.J. Simpson car chase on TV, which became a Duke burger, to the films and movie posters being removed and altered, to scantily dressed women being axed or given more clothing to wear, to the women paralysed in cocoons in reference to the movie Aliens, who originally asked Duke to kill them but now could be rescued. And if you were expecting to find the Doom Easter egg behind the altar in the chapel,
that's one doomed space marine.
well, no, that's not there, since depictions of religion had to be censored and the chapel was removed and replaced with another cell block. And that's just to name a few.
In our previous episode, we looked at several Mario Kart titles and the bits that Nintendo had to censor, including Mario Rose cigarettes found in Mario Kart 64 and the Bras Dunaire Jester found in Mario Kart 8. And here's a third thing that they decided to change from a Mario Kart game in Super Mario Kart for the Super Nintendo. Upon winning any cup with either Bowser or Princess Peach, for most of us around the world, we would see them celebrating upon the podium by throwing a bottle of champagne above their heads, catching it, and repeating the process. Or they would simply wave it around in the air. Yet, it is in the Japanese port where things got a little out of hand. There you will find Bowser chugging his champagne down as if there were no tomorrow, while Princess Peach also cannot wait to drink some champagne, and it is not long before the effects quickly become visible on her face.
Then to finish, we are heading back to 2007 when developers Hudson Soft released Mario Party 8, a title that Nintendo found themselves recalling pretty quickly thanks to what some will call a rather offensive word being found and used by Kamek. You see, when you are playing upon the board the Shy Guy Perplex Express, there is a chance Kamek will appear if someone lands on a question mark space where he will grab a carriage and send it further back down the train. But before he did so, he would originally say, "Magic Koopa Magic, turn the train spastic, make this ticket tragic." Now yes, while the word spastic is not found to be offensive in many countries, it is in the UK, as the definition refers to someone who is affected by muscle spasms, paralysis, or someone with cerebral palsy, and is a word that has been thrown around as an insult and a term of abuse. And yet, with that, it wasn't long before the game was recalled where the word was changed to erratic, and in later versions the sentence was altered completely to "let me use my magic to make this all a little more interesting."